Welcome to another episode of Trial Site News. On today's show, we're going to be discussing here in the U.S., where the U.S. House recently passed a $858 billion defense bill that would scrap the military COVID-19 vaccine mandate. This teeing up a Senate vote. So we're going to discuss what is happening here. And so from Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and our episode is starting right now. So, in a recent article on TrialSiteNews.com, we reported that with an $817 billion National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, forthcoming, the Republicans would use the armed forces vaccine mandate as leverage, potentially not supporting the bill. And so it seems that the Republicans have gotten their way. The U.S. House has passed a massive bill to fund the Defense Department for the fiscal year 2023. The Democrats, in order to win bipartisan support for the bill, agreed to Republican demands to scrap the requirement for service members to get the COVID-19 vaccination. Among the 4,000 pages of legislation is the requirement that directs Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to rescind his August 2021 memorandum imposing the mandate on the U.S. Armed Forces. This now tees up a final vote in the Senate in the coming days that would send the $858 billion behemoth to President Joe Biden's desk, where he is expected to sign. As PBS NewsHour reported on this subject, Representative Adam Smith, Democratic chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, told colleagues that the decision to impose the vaccine mandate was the right call at the time. He said that it saved lives and it made sure that our force was ready as it could possibly be in the face of the pandemic. But Smith also went on to say that the directive only required the initial vaccination, and by now that protection has worn off. He said that it is time to update the policy. Now, the article by PBS went on to say that Republicans were saying that the mandate hurt recruiting and retention efforts, and Representative Mike Rogers, top Republican on the House Armed Services Committee, said he intends in the next Congress to examine who was adversely affected by the mandate. So we can try to revisit that and make them whole to the extent desirable. Now, the mandate, originally put in place last year, recently emerged as a lightning rod for conservative Republicans who threatened to sink the entire bill if it wasn't rescinded. The National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise known as the NDAA, was released Tuesday night after weeks of backroom negotiations. Meanwhile, both President Biden and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have publicly said that they opposed a provision ending the vaccine mandate. Biden's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, would not confirm or deny Wednesday that Biden would sign the bill, instead telling reporters that Biden is, quote, going to look at the NDAA in its entirety and make his judgment on that. And went on to say that what we think happened here is Republicans in Congress have decided that they'd rather fight against the health and well-being of our troops than protecting them. And we believe that this is a mistake. Now, interestingly, the House was initially scheduled to vote on the bill last Wednesday afternoon, but its procedural path through the Rules Committee was stalled after members of the Congressional Black Caucus sought to force the inclusion of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act into the bill. The NDAA is an annual tradition in Congress where it is considered a must-pass bill because its enactment is required in order for military service members to receive their pay and benefits on time after January 1st, 2023. Now, before we wrap up this story, something else worth noting here. Also included in the bill was a $5 billion for global pandemic preparedness. As reported by the Politico, the amendment by Senate Foreign Relations Chair Bob Menendez and Ranking Member Jim Risch authorizes the funding for use over 5 years. Now, their amendment would implement a strategy to be developed by the President for U.S. global health, security, and diplomacy that advances the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention global health security agenda. It would also create a new position to be appointed by the President in the State Department to coordinate and oversee the President's strategy, and help launch a World Bank fund for global health security and pandemic prevention and preparedness. Now, I mention this because the CDC's Global Health Security Agenda is a global effort to strengthen the world's ability to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease threats. And of course, the CDC would play a leading role in implementing these programs by working directly with partner country governments to strengthen public health systems and reduce the risk of infectious disease outbreaks. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't forgotten the disastrous 2020 rollout of coronavirus tests, where contamination of their test kits, violating sound manufacturing practices, resulted in contamination of one of the 3 test components used in the highly sensitive detection process. In fact, the CDC has so botched their COVID-19 pandemic response that as recently as August of this year, the CDC Director Rochelle Walensky acknowledged the agency's failures, saying that, to be frank, we are responsible for some pretty public mistakes, from testing to data to communications. As an agency, even with all the terrific work that we do, we still suffer the consequences from these mistakes. After 18 months serving in this position, learning and living the many lessons of our COVID-19 response, and receiving feedback from many internal and external interested parties, this is the right time to take a step back and strategically position the CDC to facilitate and support the future of public health. She went on to say that we must pivot, take appropriate action, and lead the systemic changes required to equitably protect health, safety, and security of all Americans. Now, color me unimpressed by Director Walensky. Until we can see proof that the CDC has been radically changed and fixed, the last thing I think the world needs right now is more CDC guidance. Not with the past 18 months of constant mistakes and mishandling of the pandemic response by this agency and others here in the US. Trust, for me, isn't going to be readily forthcoming for an agency that has shown itself ineffective at protecting the American people. And that, my friends, will bring our episode to a close once more. As always, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. From Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and I will see you all next time.